Okay guys, so in a previous video, we walked through an entire incident response playbook that I put together for token theft and man-in-the-middle attacks that you could leverage for post-breach mitigation and getting a tenant back into a healthy state. Today, we're actually looking at the proactive end of that. How do I actually go in and prevent these types of attacks from occurring so I'm not just responding to alerts and malicious activity within the tenant? That's definitely the place that you want to be. We're going to be walking through my top recommendations for conditional access policies, and I'm actually going to be showing you the end user experience as well as the token replay being prevented or the token harvesting being prevented through these policies, so you can understand what types of policies you can begin to map out in your customer environments today. Before we dive in, guys, just a quick introduction. My name's Nick. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and T-365 is content specifically delivered to MSPs around Microsoft 365. If you guys like this token theft topic and are interested in a free webinar to learn more, check out a link in the description of this video. Okay, guys, so as we dive in here, we're going to focus in on the prevention in the attack kill chain here, where a user is going to a man-in-the-middle page there and getting their session token harvested there, and then focusing in on the replay event as well too. As we focus in on the top policies that I'm going to be walking you through today as far as my recommendations goes, you're going to take a look at this lens between the initial token harvesting event through adversary in the middle attacks and then token replay events as well too. I delineate them because while adversary in the middle attacks are very popular, usually a lot of the volume we see in user compromise, there's also the replay event that could occur through token harvesting or token theft. That is from, cross-site scripting, malware being put on a device, a malicious browser extension, things like that. And then we want to be able to have policies that could actually prevent that replay event. So you have to think about these with the user impact that we'll walk through, but also the licensing that you're going to need here as well. In most cases, you can get away with just P1 licensing, and I'll walk through the asterisks of that as we go through these. And then there's one here specifically for token protection that I'll cover for P2. So let's go ahead and dive in with our first policy here to help prevent against the initial token harvesting. I showed this in the last video, but just a quick reminder, I've simulated this event here for the token harvesting by setting up an EvilJinx server. I've registered this Apollo Cyber domain here that's been available for some time now as far as the actual registration. But within here, I've set up a fishlet specifically for Microsoft 365 web page, and I can actually get the URL here that we're going to be leveraging. That would be something that the user would be clicking on maybe in that phishing email that goes out. I showed that in the last deep dive video for the incident response. To simulate this again though, if we go ahead and grab this URL here and simulate a user clicking on that link and being taken to this fake phishing page here, we'll be able to go ahead and sign in here with our credentials because it looks like a legitimate Microsoft login page. So I'll go ahead and put in my username here, and I'll fulfill my MFA request. This user does not have a password, they're passwordless. So if a password was used, it would be also harvested here as part of the EvilJinx server and the collection that it's doing. So now it says all authorization tokens accepted. So if we were to go in here now and say sessions, and we capture the latest session here, we can now grab this URL for the cookie path. And if I go ahead and open up a new page, this is on a completely different device here. I can go ahead and sign in or go to office.com. Now, if I go to a completely different device here and just use a plugin here for the browser to import cookies, I'll go ahead and just import that session cookie that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and delete what we have here already. And I'll paste in our session cookie here, which will import everything we've got. And then I can simply click on sign in. And now I'm signed into this user account. So today we're going to look at the policies to help prevent that activity altogether, as well as a token replay event that we just saw here too. Okay, so the first policy I think is the most achievable as far as where you're at in your journey today. This is specifically going to be looking at having or requiring a managed device in order to get access into Microsoft. This is something I think is a fundamental 101 of security. If you have organizations that can sign in from any device, then you should probably start there as far as investigating protections and getting that into place first before taking a look at this policy. So I'm just going to call this require a managed device. And in these policies, I'm going to go ahead and scope this for the pilot users that I'm going to use to test this out and showcase this to you. Obviously, though, in a production environment, you want to do your own proper testing, but then, scope this out to all users in the organization. So I'm going to go ahead and select my users here, and I'm just going to select one for this testing purpose here. And within all of these, you want to go ahead and exclude a break class user here as well, just so you don't lock yourself out while you're doing your testing. I'm going to go ahead and eliminate my emergency access user. For the targeted resource for this one, this is going to be all resources. And then under the conditions here, there's a couple ways, that we can require this depending on your environment. So if you're running a on-prem Active Directory in a hybrid scope, I'd recommend doing the grant control where you say that you need to require Microsoft on-prem hybrid join device to be part of this as well too, in order to grant access. That's one way to go about it. Let's say you're only cloud and you want to enforce this as well too. You can go under the conditions here, and under the filter for devices, you can say configure, and then I want to exclude these filter devices. And in here, you can say the trust type equals, and then Entra joined as an example of this for what you would want to do. Or you could say registered, depending on your environment, depending how the devices are set up. Generally speaking, Entra joined is going to be the way to go. That's how I know that they are a managed device. You could also exclude, obviously, any compliant devices, and we'll get into a device compliance policy. It's a little bit separate than what we're going to be looking for here today too. So we're going to exclude these trust types of joined here for this particular setting. And then under device platforms, you can go ahead and configure this for selected device platforms and just choose Windows devices as an example of this. What I would say is I would handle iOS and Android in a separate policy, but I'm going to go ahead and click on done here. And under the grant controls, I'm going to go ahead and block access. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn this policy to on and click create. So if we take a look at this now that we have that policy set up, I'm going to go ahead and get the URL here that we're going to use for this. I just need to make sure I put this in here correctly. And I'm going to go ahead and copy our URL. And then I'm just going to simulate a user, clicking on this link and being taken to this fake Microsoft web page. You can see here, this is updating to reflect the user landing on that page. And then when I go ahead and sign in here with my username, I will be prompted, in this case for MFA. I just want to note here that this user is set up for passwordless, which is why I wasn't prompted for a password. Otherwise, that would have gotten harvested here as well too. So that is a downside still that I will outline, but the password could still get compromised through this type of attack. But you'll see here that the actual account isn't compromised as a whole, and they get this message that says you cannot access this resource right now, and then it doesn't meet this criteria. If we take a look at our sign-in logs here, we'll notice in this conditional access check for this failed sign-in, require managed device failed here. You can see here the device is not matched here for the criteria, and this failed to go on and go through for this particular sign-in. So with each one of these guys, I want to give you the quick pros and cons just so you understand how this might work within your organization or the organizations that you manage. Pros here that I was mentioning earlier is that this one is probably the most achievable that you can get into here, with it being something that's, in most of our cases, we're already doing today. We're already managing devices. Let's go ahead and get this policy pushed out so that it enforces that for our users and starts to get that protection in for token harvesting through the most common that we're seeing today, which is the adversary in the middle attack. Con here that I would say is the biggest con is that this does not prevent token replay. And I showed this in my diagram earlier where I was walking you guys through the policies, but what effectively we're saying here is that if a user is signed in on their device and they've gone through, it's a managed device, and somehow the attacker gets a token through other methods outside of adversary in the middle, potentially cross-site scripting, malicious malware on the device, malicious browser extensions, mentioned those earlier, they can actually still grab that token and replay it on a non-managed device and still get access into that user's account. So there's that caveat with this one. or it has some limitations or breakdowns in our protections. So the next policy we have here is requiring a compliant device. I think this steps up in complexity because it requires that you have devices not only managed but enrolled into Intune. I think that is more complex from just the resistance that you could get there, but also, having device compliance enforced is definitely something where you want to be, but not necessarily as easy as just having them managed. The benefit here, the pro that I see, is also that you can extend your accessibility for your devices to BYOD if the organization that you have as a customer wants to support that. But additionally, it could support other mobile devices as well too. If you want to extend this to iOS and Android, you could have them enrolled and make sure they're compliant before they're accessing your corporate resources. You could also, in lieu of that, do some type of man policy for them, which is outside the scope of this video, but we have the same considerations here as the previous scope as far as the policy goes. So all resources, we're going to say specific users included. We have the one condition selected within here, which is the device platforms, is that today I'm only selecting Windows. But again, this is where you could say any device platform supported as long as it's compliant. For your organization, for the grant controls, you're going to require the device to be marked as compliant within here. And then you obviously, again, just to make sure you reiterate, you do want to have a break glass user excluded from this policy within this use case. Additionally, if you're a CSP provider, should have mentioned this for the last one as well too, you should exclude, in this particular case, any service provider users potentially, because this would block you from getting access in there if you have GDAP permission set up, just as a unique consideration for these that you might have within the organization. And then from there, you're able to enforce this. And I won't actually be showcasing this one because it looks the exact same as what we just saw within the managed device compliance policy. But this is another one that, again, you could use to step up in complexity a little bit from the overhead that it would take. But if you're already enrolled into Intune for your managed devices, you already have that configured, I'd recommend doing this one over just the require managed devices. Now, one thing to note with this one, I would say, is an asterisk that I would be not doing you guys a disservice if I didn't mention it, is that there is a working exploit for requiring a compliant device that has been written up on in the past year here. And this is understanding, that this can be exploited very specific way. This article I'll link within there and goes through it in depth, as well as some of the detection logs that you can query for this type of event to occur. But just note that this has an asterisk for that additional exploit, which is why we might want to look for additional requirements as part of the policies that you're pushing out, which is the other recommendations that I'm providing here. Next one here, guys, when we talk about requiring compliant device, pros of this one here is going to be more flexibility in your device types, meaning you can support BYOD or personal devices as long as they're enrolled and managed in Intune as an example of this, and still meeting the compliance standards you have with your compliance policy. Cons here on this one is that there's obviously more overhead and management that you have to have when you talk about requiring compliant devices. When they go outside of compliance, what's your SOP for that? How do you get devices enrolled into Intune? Are they enrolled already? So there's a lot of considerations there for that you have to take into effect. And then the other one here is the same as the last, where it does not prevent the token replay. So again, if attacker has garnered a token through other means and decides to replay it on their device, it's already got that hash that says, hey, we've signed in with a compliant device. It's not going to recognize that and have any type of device-bound protections. The next policy we're going to walk through today is Phishing-Resistant MFA. So if I create this new policy, and I'm going to say require Phishing-Resistant MFA, same thing here for our scope. We're going to test this out with a individual user. And just by the way, guys, this user has already set up a FIDO2 key. So just note that that's kind of a prerequisite there. And I'm going to go ahead and exclude the emergency access user here. And then I'm going to say targeted resource for this user is going to be all resources. And under the grant controls here, I don't actually care about any of the conditions for the devices, but I'm going to say require an authentication strength, and I'm going to say phishing-resistant MFA. And then I'm going to turn this on, click create. If we simulate this again now, we're going to go ahead and target that same link here that a user might be clicking on. And here, the user could start typing in their username as an example of this, and it's going to say, hey, let's go next. And then it's going to prompt them to sign in. And in this case, it's prompting me for my MFA. But as you'll see, because I have Authenticator as well as the FIDO2, the behavior here is going to shift into requiring the FIDO2 key that I have registered. So I'm going to go ahead and leverage this to go ahead and sign in. And I'll go ahead and fill in this information. And then you get this message here that says the security key does not look familiar. Please try a different one. And it's got it tied to that apollocyber.io domain. And then you get this something went wrong. So there's a couple of considerations here for this one. Obviously, just their user gets blocked no matter what they do. But the other consideration is if they're set up for FIDO2 and they're just using a security key or Windows Hello for Business, they might not have that second factor with Authenticator. And so they're wondering why they're getting prompted for that to begin with, or they might just get redirected to the FIDO2 workflow and then get presented with this. But you'll notice over here that nothing actually was harvested. No session tokens were harvested as part of this. If we look at the sign-in logs for this one, we can see that this was interrupted, and we can see our phishing-resistant MFA failed on the grant controls and did not allow this to proceed further. Okay, so as we talk about the pros and cons of phishing-resistant MFA, one of the first pros here is that it's the strongest form of MFA that you can adopt today in Entra. And this is the byproduct of this is really that you get more protections than just this token theft type of attack chain that we're talking about. It broadly would prevent a large amount of phishing attempts altogether. The other thing that we have to consider with this one here is that this is passwordless. So you noticed in some of these other attacks I've mentioned that if I had a password enabled, the attacker using Evil Jinx or harvesting, my credentials would still be able to get my password and maybe use that to try to breach the account in other ways, like MFA fatigue as an example, because they have my password. So it doesn't prevent them from harvesting this in those other methods. But if you're using just phishing resistant method, they're just signing in with that FIDO2 key or Windows Hello for Business or something like that. Cons here is that this is going to have a lot of end user friction for implementation. We all know how hard it's been to implement regular MFA. Getting users to adopt something like a FIDO2 key as an example is hard. So that's why the recommendation here is maybe to start with Windows Hello for Business, because it's using a biometric such as their face to scan and be able to sign in. Same thing applies here though, where if they or signed in already, the token was harvested, it could be replayed. Okay, so the next one here is requiring a trusted location or network. This one's obviously much harder to implement in the average environment just due to the nature of accessibility, obviously number one, but also just the rise of remote and hybrid work that we have to contend with here. But same scope as far as what we're doing here. We want to scope this to all resources. And then we're going to say this is including any network, but we're excluding our trusted network. In this case, I'm just blocking off our office as part of this as well. Under the conditions, I'm including just Windows devices as part of this, and it has that network location under there. Under the grant controls, I'm saying block access. So I'm going to go ahead and save this guy. So here we'll go ahead and try to log in again or access that malicious URL. And here I go ahead and get the sign in unsuccessful. Here you can access this resource right now. Doesn't that meet the criteria to access this resource? So same message as before that we got with the compliant or managed device. In our logs, we can see that this policy here for required trusted location matched on being something that should be included. And then our block was configured here to prevent that from occurring. The location for this one being outside of our trusted location here for this to occur. We have the policy here where the location was not matched because it is in one of our trusted locations. The interesting thing here is if the attacker harvested that session token through outside methods outside of adversary in the middle, maybe through malware that they install on the device or harvesting it through a malicious browser extension, if they go and they try to replay this session cookie here, I just simulate this and try to import that and have that, I can go ahead and just refresh this page And I still get this block here for you can't access this right now. So you'll notice that it still captured my username, as long as who I am from that session cookie, but I'm still not able to go into the account and perform the token replay event. In the signing logs for that one, we can see that get the similar message here for the access policy does not allow token issuance. The location is at an anonymous location here that's outside of our trusted location. And the Washington, Virginia address is anomaly. It's not a managed device in any sort. And then for conditional access, require trusted location blocked because it was matched on being outside of our trusted location. So the next one here for trusted location, pros here being that it can prevent the token replay, as I just saw there. So it's both the protection on the front end as well as the back end for the token replay event. Cons here that I mentioned, it's really hard to implement just given the rise of remote and hybrid work. Flexibility, not needing to sign into a particular IP address or trusted location to be able to sign in. Can implement it in some customers, but probably not all in your ecosystem. The next policy here is requiring a device-bound token. This is something currently in preview. I did a whole video about this one, so you can check that out for more details. But effectively here, this is only available as part of P2 licensing. Today, it only supports these two resources, which would encompass the Outlook environment for a user, for the SharePoint Online, that includes OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams as an example within this. The conditions here, though, we can only support Windows devices with this one. In the client apps, this is the big one that is the gap today, only supports mobile apps and desktop clients, does not support the browser-based experience. So with adversary in the middle attacks and that token being harvested most of the time, in a browser-based experience and the token replay happening there, this doesn't provide us a ton of protections today. And the session controls is just built in here for the required token protection for sign-in sessions. This would specifically prevent a token from being replayed on the client application for Outlook or the Microsoft 365 apps. So while it does provide protections for token replay, it does not prevent against token harvesting, especially if not for adversary in the middle attacks, and does not prevent against this in this case that the token is being replayed in the browser. So for token protection, the pros here obviously that it prevents the token replay event with the asterisks that we're about to get into on the con side here. So it's really powerful for that, but more importantly, as a combination here, it's also low to no end user friction. So they just have to have a managed device. Their primary refresh token is bound to that device, and that would prevent the token replay event from occurring on a different device that doesn't have that binding in place. Now the cons here, obviously this is in preview, so there's a lot of limited functionality. The most prevalent of which is that there's no browser support today. It's just for those client applications, which is a really limited scope. It's also limited in scope with the device types, these applications that it can support at this point in time too. So very much looking to see how this could expand over time. The last protection policy we're going to look at today involves global secure access. And if you're not familiar with that, this is more of a new solution for Microsoft that involves both SASE solutions, ETNA considerations as well. But within the portal here, there's some prerequisites I'm not going to go fully through, but effectively you can go into this dashboard and activate it if you have at least an Entra P1 license. I put on my diagram there either Entra P1 or an add-on with an asterisk because you get more capabilities with the entire add-on, which is known as Entra Suite offering here, but you can access what I'm about to show you with just the P1 license, which I think is pretty powerful. You do need to go in and configure traffic forwarding for Microsoft traffic, and this is going to be applicable for these various Microsoft applications that you'll see here, which includes Outlook and our common areas that we'd want protection for, like SharePoint, Teams, etc. And then from here, you can go ahead and begin to download these clients onto workstations. And this is what's going to be looked at here for saying, hey, if you're using global secure access, we're going to allow you to access these resources. Otherwise, we're not. So the prerequisites for this is that you do have to have your devices here joined as a consideration here. You have to have Windows 10 or 11. And then the local admin permissions is just for the actual install of that as well too, but the devices themselves need to be hybrid joined or Entra joined in order for this to work. The other thing, just as a consideration for the settings, is under session management, you need to turn this on for adaptive access. And what this is actually going to do under your protection here for the named locations is going to create this all compliant network locations that we're going to be leveraging in our conditional access policy that's going to be applied for these users. The other thing that I noticed here, just as an FYI, when I activated this, it took around an hour or two before this actually started to pick up and recognize that I was using the client on the device. So I wasted, kind of an hour of my life troubleshooting, wondering why I was getting blocked for signing in after I enforced this policy on a device that actually had the GSA client on it as well too. The benefits to this policy and this output here is that obviously, you can get more flexibility with user sign-in where you're pushing this client application down to devices and allowing them to sign in. And it gives you more flexibility here too, where it's not a lot of end user friction if you're deploying that in automated fashion with something like Intune or your RMM tool as an example of that. But within here, we've got our similar considerations for the users we're scoping here, removing and excluding break glass users. For the targeted resources, I was testing with Exchange, which you can do all resources here. With any network location or the network section here, you could do any network location in the include, and the exclude is going to be our all compliant network locations. And that's going to be the condition that's set here. And then the grant control is going to be block. So within here, you could also potentially exclude device platforms or just include Windows devices if that's what you're pushing this out towards today. The client application does support Mac OS, iOS, and Android are in preview as of the time of this recording. The only caveat here with Windows, I would say, is it doesn't work with ARM devices. So if you have a newer device like a Copilot PC, as an example, this might change by the time you're watching this, but that also is not supported with the client application being deployed. So a lot of unique asterisks with this one. But like I said, if you can support that, you do have your devices joined into Entra, it is a flexible way for you to be able to push this out and get some of these token theft protections. If we take a look at the end user experience here, after you've installed the client, you'll have that located on a device. I've gone ahead and disabled this client just so you can see what this looks like after we enforce this policy. I'm signing into this device here and signing into Office just normally without, looking at the man in the middle link that we've been seeing here for this example. But you get this same message that we've seen a couple of times now where he says you cannot access this right now, doesn't meet the criteria. So now if I go in and I go ahead and enable that client, we'll be able to see the difference here. We'll be able to see now that it's connected. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and try to re-sign in to office.com again, just a regular sign in and be prompted for regular MFA. After I fulfill that, I'll be able to sign into my account just fine. So that's kind of the difference here of having a device without the client on or without the client altogether, and then having it activated and being able to sign into my account. If we go back to our malicious link example in the fake Microsoft web page here, if I go to click on that link and have this web page open where I'm signing into the non-legitimate Microsoft page, I'm going to go ahead and put in my username again. I'll fulfill this MFA request just like I was doing in the legitimate page, but then I get that you cannot access this right now. Same message as I got when I didn't have the client there. So for this one in the sign-in logs, you actually have a filter here that you can leverage here, which says through global secure access. And I can say yes. So I can see all of the sign-ins here that were part of that. And actually, if I look at a sign-in here, based off that, I can see that this through global secure access says yes. And then for the failed sign-in, I can see it's from a different IP, different location, but the through global secure access is no. And the result of this is a failure because of our conditional access policy that's in place.
Okay, for the last one here, guys, for requiring GSA, pros, I'd say, is it prevents both the token harvesting and the token replay, which is great. Provides a lot of flexibility for the organization. It's part of a SASE solution that you can deploy to workstations, whether or not they're enrolled into Intune. Keep in mind, they still have to be joined or hybrid joined today for them to actually work with this. But provides a lot of great flexibility over some of the other methods that we looked through. On the con side here, there's definitely a lot of overhead when we talk about being able to deploy the client out to applications, not necessarily something we're not familiar with as MSPs. I'd say though, the other con though is it's early in its life cycle, so it's likely going to change a lot, might have different requirements, might have a lot of troubleshooting or bugs that we have to deal with. But more specifically, there's some limitations today, like I mentioned in the video, around like ARM-based machines, as well as considerations for needing to have the devices joined. And then costs, I put an asterisk next to this because obviously, I showed you get this as part of Entra P1 that you can start to deploy with just the Microsoft access. But if you want to extend this out into holistic internet access and private access, that comes at an additional fee for the add-on of Entra Suite. Okay guys, that's everything I had for you today. Definitely comment below with any questions you had. And as I mentioned earlier, if you guys want to be part of a free webinar, check out the link in the description. I'll see you guys next week.